A note to listeners, American Hustlers was created from in-depth research and reporting, public records, and the opinions of participants. The views expressed do not reflect those of Frequency Machine, its affiliates, licensees, or employees. In some cases, names were changed to protect the privacy of those involved, and all subjects are presumed innocent until proven guilty. This episode also includes some violent and sexually explicit content that may be triggering to some. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Previously on American Hustlers.
You can't con somebody if you're not at least charming. And at very least, Kaushal was charming.
After we dug into the earliest cons of Kaushal Narula,
he's evil, he's like a vessel,
and Danny Garcia,
Danny just did what he wanted, and it didn't matter who he hurt.
Julie tackled two schemes by Kaushal that showcased how the gay grifters operated. First, the supposed sale of an Yves Tanguy painting to an art collector named Gary Heidenreich. To pull the con off, Kaushal needed someone Gary trusted. Enter Russell Manning.
Russell Manning managed a very affluent gallery in San Francisco.
After Russell is arrested and fingers Kaushal as the mastermind of the con, he knows the police will be after him. Which brings us to scheme number 2.
Entire boxes were missing. I mean, just exquisite. Very, very valuable pieces of jewelry.
Kaushal had been staying with his friend, Stephen Valentino. But knowing he'd need some quick money, he stole Stephen's mother's jewels right out of her bedroom.
He would borrow from Peter to pay Paul.
Kaushal hawked the jewels to cover bail, but his arrest was a key moment in the gay grifter's story, because it was David Replogle, Danny Garcia's attorney in the Thomas White case, that came to Kaushal's rescue.
What the F with David Replogle? Why is he all of a sudden Team Kaushal?
I don't know if the two of them had a romantic thing or if David just thought Kaushal was a more valuable player.
And with more value would come way more risk.
Hello?
Hi, I'm trying to reach...
Yes.
Is this...
Yes.
Oh my God. I cannot believe it.
My partner, Julie, and I have been tasked with uncovering the story behind two prolific con men, Danny Garcia and Kaushal Narula. By 2008, Kaushal and Danny had been conning their way through California, Mexico, and Hawaii for nearly 4 years. Every con seemed to raise the stakes. Victims would discover their bank accounts suddenly empty, their jewelry would go missing, the obscure surrealist painting they'd forked over hundreds of thousands of dollars for would simply never show up. By this point, Danny and Kaushal had made plenty of things disappear, but not an actual person.
I'm calling about Cliff Lambert.
Cliff Lambert, 74 years old when he went missing, a Palm Springs resident who lived in the ritzy neighborhood of Las Palmas Estates. And the victim whose disappearance would ultimately be the most significant turning point in Danny and Kaushal's criminal career. That's pretty much all I knew about the man, and in the months I've spent working on this show, not much has changed. I've exhausted so many leads, and now I'm just feeling desperate to find anyone who knew Cliff. It's not just to unpack who Cliff was. I want to understand how he, out of all of Kaushal and Danny's victims, lost way more than just money.
My name...
I can barely hear you. Could you call me on my cell phone?
Yes!
310?
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Your call has been forwarded to an automated voice messaging system.
What the fuck? Ugh. Hello?
Hi, did you know Cliff?
After months of trying to find someone, it looks like I may have just struck gold. I'm Kim Kantner, and yes, we are finally going to talk about Cliff Lambert on this episode of American Hustlers. Presented by True Crime News. On December 6th, 2008, Cliff's good friend Cody was beyond worried. He hadn't heard from Cliff for a few days and had called him upwards of 20 times. So Cody grabbed another longtime friend of Cliff's named Eddie, and armed with the key to Cliff's house, the two went to check on him. Things were weird from the jump. First, Cliff's door was ajar. They called for him and got no response, not even a bark from Cliff's dog Alex. But once inside, they noticed a glass of watered-down scotch and a pack of cigarettes sitting on the coffee table. In that moment, they must have felt a wave of relief. Cliff didn't smoke, but scotch on the rocks with a splash of soda water was his drink of choice. The cigarettes must belong to a date. Cliff was entertaining. All right, they better sneak back out before they ruin the mood. But as relieved as Cody and Eddie were to have seen signs of life on the coffee table, neither of them could entirely shake a nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Date or no date, it wasn't like Cliff to not call or text back. By noon the next day, when they still hadn't heard from Cliff, Eddie was sitting across a desk from Officer Sawyer at the Palm Springs Police Department, filing a missing persons report. I Googled Cliff Lambert's name, but all I found was one very brief missing persons blurb in the Palm Springs newspaper, The Desert Sun. No info on who he was or what he was doing in 2008 before he crossed paths with Danny and Kaushal. This did not deter me. I do true crime for a living and go on fishing expeditions all the time. Cliff was about to be another. I didn't know how thorough or far back in time the paper's search went, so I wanted to dive into their archives, and for $9.99 a month, I could do it. My first search took me way back to an article written 50 years ago.
Hello?
Hey. Okay, so I found the following about Cliff Lambert.
Okay.
I'm going to start with the eldest entry, which is on Friday, October 15th of 1971.
Oh, way back.
Everything I'm about to read you is from the Desert Sun's socialite section. The headline is Princess Alexandra receives a royal welcome. So Princess Alexandra is the princess of something. I probably should have Googled this before I got on the phone with you. Oh, here she is. Princess Alexandra is a 34-year-old first cousin of the Queen of England and one of Great Britain's 3 reigning princesses. Okay?
Okay.
So in one of the paragraphs, it says, what are you doing? I can hear all that.
Okay, I'm done. I'm starving.
Dude. Eat something quiet.
It's over. I'm sitting again. I'm sitting.
Oh my God. Okay. So that was my first finding of him in Palm Springs.
Cool.
We move on to 1990. This is the headline of the social scene. Lambert, Fitzmaurice, that's his ex, throw glittering holiday bash. It goes on to list all these people that were there. Jean Garland, which I have no idea if that's any relation to Judy or any other Garland.
Okay.
Maja Gabor.
Really?
Jaja and Ava's sister.
Okay.
And then the last one is October of 95.
Okay.
The headline is Tea Sippers Toast Summer at Lautner Designed Home.
The home, though, that he was living in.
Yep. Goes on to say that John Lautner was a student of Frank Lloyd Wright's.
Oh, well, that is worth a lot of money.
Yeah. I feel like there has to be someone who's not dead who's willing to talk to us about him, you know? There's got to be someone.
At least the newspaper articles gave us one more thing Julie and I now know about Cliff.
He was really in the highfalutin life.
I know, right?
After talking to Julie, I took another stab at everything. I dove back into our master contact grid. I sent Hail Mary emails to everyone I hadn't heard back from. I hit up Tyson for any thread of information that might lead me to a human that knew Cliff Lambert. Today, Cliff would be 88 years old. So, who is still alive that knew him? What are their names? And most importantly, where in the hell is his family? In the missing person article, not one family member was mentioned, and it was his friend Eddie who reported him missing. I tried hunting him down, but couldn't make contact. I tried to find Cody, and failed. I tracked down Cliff's neighbors at the time. One is passed away, and the other alive and kicking, but not talking. It was dead end after dead end. So then I went back to the book that Tyson and the sisters wrote about Danny and Kaushal's cons. This time, I focused on some emails in the book that Cliff's friends sent to him in the weeks after Eddie reported him missing. One email from New Year's Eve caught my attention. It said, "Wherever you are, Happy New Year's. And I will be at Dink's at 10 o'clock to celebrate the new year." He signed with initials, but for the purpose of this podcast, I'll refer to him by a pseudonym, Carl. I emailed the sisters to see what, if anything, they knew about him. Sherry wrote back and said he may have been connected with the Palm Springs restaurant he mentioned in his email. That would be Dink's. But I quickly learned the restaurant closed a few years ago. I did more digging and found a name associated with the restaurant, but that person's name was nothing even remotely close to Carl. And when I Googled that guy, guess what? Dead. However, his obituary was filled with names of friends who may have also known Cliff. Diving down that rabbit hole led me to one person that just might be my guy. A few interweb searches later, I came up with a hit list of 6 phone numbers for Carl. Were they his numbers? Was he even alive? There was no way to know unless I started dialing. So that's what I did.
Welcome to Verizon Wireless. Your call cannot be completed as dialed.
Next number.
Hello?
Hi, I'm trying to reach...
Yes.
Amazingly, I got him on the second try.
My
I
name...
can barely hear you.
Oh, I'm calling about Cliff Lambert. My name is Kim...
I'm sorry, we have a bad line. Could you call me on my cell phone?
Yes.
Your call has been forwarded to an automated voice messaging system. At the tone, please record your message.
Hi, my name is Kim Kantner, and we had a horrible connection. I'm a television producer here in LA, and I am working on a podcast project involving Cliff Lambert, and I would love to speak with you. And it's Wednesday afternoon, maybe around like 2 o'clock or something like that. 12:45. I was close. Okay, thank you so much. Bye.
Ugh. Cold calling people is the worst, no matter what the circumstance. But when you're calling a stranger regarding their missing friend, it's a special kind of bad. Something I find myself doing a lot as a true crime producer. It never gets easier or less awkward. I began to doubt my message to Carl. Did I say too much? Not enough? Did I sound callous? Too lighthearted? I don't know. All I know is my phone still wasn't ringing. Do I text him? Oh my God, please call me back. Please call me back. 2 minutes, which felt like 2 hours later, my phone finally lit up. Hello? Carl didn't even say hello. He said this.
Did you know Cliff?
I did not know Cliff at all.
I explained who I was and about the podcast, and once Carl kind of understood everything, I asked if it was okay to record our call. He agreed with one caveat.
I don't want to use my real name.
Okay, we can just call you whatever you want.
Yeah, don't use my name.
There it was. The same fear Julie and I had been hearing over and over. I was worried for a hot minute that it would keep Carl from talking, but he hadn't hung up on me yet.
Okay, so I promise not to use your name. I'll forget I even know your name.
The phone connection Carl and I had was not great, so I apologize for that. But I had Carl on the line, he knew Cliff, and I didn't want to do anything that would delay the conversation or give him an opportunity to change his mind about talking.
Could you tell me how you met Cliff Lambert?
Well, I went to a Christmas cocktail party. I believe it was Beverly Hills.
And did you strike up a conversation with Cliff at the party, or?
Yeah, we hit it off.
Hit it off so much so that not long after the new year, Cliff visited Carl and his partner at their villa in Italy.
Got in the car, we traveled down to Naples, Bologna, Tuscany, and just having a good old time. It was really, really nice.
Wow.
I'm dying right now. Finally, some real information about Cliff.
And tell me a bit about his lifestyle.
Well, Cliff was a prominent person in West Hollywood, Beverly Hills area back in the 60s and 70s. He had an art gallery there and did things with real estate, and then he sold his business on La Cienega building, and he moved to New York.
While in New York, Cliff met Tom Fitzmaurice, who would become his longtime partner.
And they loved New York, but then they got tired of it, and they decided to come back to California. and Cliff bought a house in Palm Springs.
Who did he hang around?
He knew all the great people. His parties were amazing. I remember once I stayed at his house in Palm Springs. I just woke up, I heard the phone ring, and that was back in my condo in Los Angeles. And then I heard a voice going, Cliff, darling. And I thought, oh, my God. And my reaction was just to hang up because I realized it was on my phone. And then I got up and went out to the living room where Cliff was. And he said to me, you answered my phone. I said, yeah, I'm sorry about that. I didn't know what I was doing. I was tired and sleepy. And he said, you hung up on Abel Kabor. I said, oh, sorry. So, yeah. He knew so many. He had such a wonderful, charmed life.
What do you know about his family life?
He never knew his mom and dad. He didn't know who anyone was.
And
so the person, people that raised him, he never talked about, but he said he was adopted.
Okay. And did he keep in touch with his adopted family or not really?
I don't. He never talked about them. Never.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to mention about him before we move on to when he went missing?
Cliff loved people, all types of people. He used to say something to me. He said, a gentleman can talk to the guy that pumps his gas or talk to a royalty. You talk to these people the same, with respect. And I always remember that.
Mm-hmm.
And people like that, they're not around anymore, you know?
Sometime between 1991 and 94, Tom and Cliff broke up. Soon after, Cliff met a much younger partner named Travis. They spent the next 14 years together, eventually marrying. But when they no longer saw eye to eye, a messy and litigious divorce ensued. Not long after, Travis died in a swimming pool accident. In 2008, Cliff was 74 years old and single for the first time in decades. And that's when he began dating online. One guy he met stood out.
He said, oh, I met this guy through the internet. He said, you know what? He's been coming here visiting me. Cliff paid for his plane ticket from San Francisco. We said, oh, Lord. He was searching for a boyfriend. One way or the other, he was searching for a boyfriend.
Right.
Carl and Cliff's other friends were skeptical, but then Cliff was certainly entitled to some companionship. Who were they to judge? And from what Cliff told them, his new friend was a great thinker and a tech genius who helped with his computer problems. At first, things seemed to be going well. But as summer turned to fall,
things got kind of weird. He would call and says, someone's been in my house. Someone's been going through my papers. And I can't find my passport. Dina and I just looked at each other like, oh my God, this guy is really losing it. Which was, you know, not comfortable to hear him talk like that.
Yeah.
You know? But Cliff was smart, you know, and he knew something was not right at his home.
But before Cliff could get to the bottom of the strange happenings at his house, he got an unexpected call.
I think it was in November, he got a phone call and he said, some gentleman called me up and said someone he knew in his past, a wealthy woman, passed away. And that woman wants to put him in her will.
Carl didn't recall the gentleman's name, but Julie and I were able to find it in court documents related to Cliff's case. The man's name was Samuel Oren, and he said he was a lawyer overseeing the will of a wealthy heiress who was a longtime friend of Cliff's. He told Cliff the heiress had passed and had left him some money in her will. Oren was here to settle all the paperwork.
So Cliff says, this guy is a worker, but you know what? I'm going to go have dinner with him anyway. And I thought, oh my God, he must be lonely.
Right.
Plans were made. A meeting was set. On December 4th, Cliff Lambert went to Dink's to meet Samuel Oren for dinner. A few minutes after Cliff arrived, in walked Mr. Oren. When he introduced himself, he spoke with a British accent, and they enjoyed a lovely meal of soup, baked Alaska, and some drinks. Sam Oren left the waiter a $100 tip on a $126 bill. At 9:40 p.m., the two left the restaurant and went their separate ways. Now, if the name Samuel Oren sounds familiar, that's because he was part of the art con Julie told you about in the last episode. You know, the one where a wealthy art dealer was swindled out of $400,000 for a painting that never arrived. The art dealer had only ever communicated with Oren via email. Cliff Lambert had just had dinner with him in person. Except Sam Oren wasn't his real name. His real name was Kaushal Narula.
Hey.
Hi there.
So, did you find Carl?
I did find Carl. It was a miracle. I won't bore you with the whole sordid story, but I did find Carl. He had some great information. After months and months of trying to connect with someone, really anyone, who could fill in the details of the events surrounding Cliff Lambert's disappearance, I'd finally connected with his close friend, Carl. One of the big questions Julie and I hoped he could answer was, how did Cliff even meet Kaushal Marula? Answer? He didn't. Or at least he never knew that's who he was meeting.
So, wait, Kaushal told Cliff his name was Sam Oren? That's the same alias he used when he was conning Gary Heidenreich.
Yeah. The night that Cliff met Samuel Oren, the lawyer, in the restaurant, Carl and his business partner at the time were at the restaurant, and Cliff asked them to basically spy, because Cliff was leery of Samuel Oren in this whole story.
Okay, wow. I have so many questions. How did Kaushal even find out about Cliff and set his sights on him?
Danny Garcia. Remember the young man Cliff had met online? The one who started visiting around the same time weird stuff started happening? Yep, that was Danny. So, yeah, that is how Cliff came on Kaushal's radar. And, I'm sure knowing Danny was talking about this wealthy guy, and he's a friend of mine, and he has this amazing house in Palm Springs, drives a Rolls Royce, drives a Mercedes, cha-ching. I think they just saw dollar signs.
Yeah.
From what I can gather, December 4th is the first time that they had dinner together. And then 2 days later, Cliff goes missing.
Wow.
Yeah. And missing to this day. Carl answered a lot of questions, but I had more he didn't know the answer to. Like, what was the depth of Danny's relationship with Cliff? And what on earth was Kaushal's endgame? For the answers, I reached out to Danny's cousin Dennis, who at the time drove Danny and Kaushal and the rest of the gay grifters around. Side note, after 5 episodes, I decided I should find out where the term grifter came from. Given how often we say it in this podcast. Turns out it's thought to be an amalgamation of the old school word grafter, meaning swindler or conman, and drifter, as in one without roots. Anyway, while Dennis drove Kaushal and Danny on their many capers, the 3 spent hours trapped in the car, and they had nothing to do but talk. Here's Dennis.
So Danny first mentioned Cliff to me as a financial source for his StarTech business that he wanted to do. And this is a 18-wheeler trailer filled with a plasma burner from end to end. And it was a brilliant idea. StarTech actually was trading at $4 a share at that point.
StarTech was an environmental company. They were located in Bristol, Connecticut, and their big idea was to use a plasma burner to break down garbage and rid landfills of the stuff we dump in them every single day. StarTech was a legit company, but it was in no way Danny's. Honestly, I have no idea how or why Danny got involved with it. All I do know is that he thought Cliff could help out. So Cliff was going to be a potential investor.
Yeah, financial benefactor. And, at that time, and they actually became more close friends than, Cliff wasn't into anything sexual.
According to Dennis, after multiple trips to Palm Springs to convince Cliff to invest in StarTech, Danny realized Cliff was not buying it. It was then Danny began to get the money he wanted from Cliff by stealing it.
Danny would be taking silver. The supposed Louis XIV chair turned out to be a fake. Danny was monitoring all that stuff for Cliff, being his boy, looking out for him.
Not everyone's definition of looking out would involve stealing, but in Danny's case, it seemed to. According to Dennis, Danny was stealing Cliff's possessions and convincing Cliff they had been burglarized when the two were out of the house. Danny would then come to Cliff's rescue by dealing with Cliff's homeowner's insurance company to get him reimbursed for his losses. Danny was also, slowly but surely, stealing something else from Cliff.
But then Danny had seen all his information, his birth certificate and all these other things.
This corroborates what Carl was saying earlier about Cliff questioning missing paperwork and even his passport. Cliff's possessions and his identity were disappearing before his very eyes, and he knew it. Sort of. He just had no idea it was sweet little Danny boy, the guy who was keeping him company, fixing his computer, taking care of insurance claims, a real solid friend. Then, Danny screwed up big time.
Danny was at Palm Springs, and he called me begging me to come pick him up. And I said, well, what happened with your flight? Cliff canceled it. I'm like, what do you mean Cliff canceled it? Yeah, I tried to upgrade, so I get a, seat up front.
Danny told Dennis that Cliff had an alert set anytime his credit card was used. So when Cliff found out what Danny had done, he sent Danny packing. It wasn't about the money. The upgrade was only $16. It was that Danny did it without asking. I imagine Cliff felt that if Danny was charging things behind his back, what else was he doing when he thought Cliff wouldn't notice? The answer? So many things. This was not the end of Danny pursuing Cliff, though. He sent him multiple emails, called repeatedly, and even showed up at his door one day unannounced with flowers. Cliff let him in, but the friendship was never the same. Then Samuel Oren, aka Kaushal, entered the picture. But what we didn't know is what the plan was. Here's Dennis to fill in some blanks.
Kaushal, he'd overheard Danny talking about Cliff with money. He didn't care who got hurt, because he was desperate.
What's Kaushal afraid of at this point?
Being deported. And it was pretty much the turning point right there.
To jog your memory, Kaushal got into the States on a student visa for the San Francisco college he helped topple. And in a way, he'd been on borrowed time with immigration ever since. So, when Danny, in a fit of rage, which I'm assuming had to do with money he thought he was owed for some con, ratted Kaushal out to ICE, Kaushal was arrested because his student visa was long expired. He was bonded out, but then he was jailed and indicted for the art con he pulled. And not long after, he was locked up in Marin County for the jewels he'd stolen from actor and bon vivant Stephen Valentino's mother. Each time, he'd been bailed out by David Replogle, the gay grifter's in-house attorney. But the clock was ticking on Kaushal's ability to fight these allegations and remain in the States. Was Cliff's money somehow the answer to Kaushal's mounting legal problems? Here's Dennis with more.
So at this point, it's coming down to where they were going to, pull a Thomas White on him.
And who's they?
Danny, Kaushal, and David.
Their plan in a nutshell was to kidnap Cliff, take him to Mexico, file trumped-up sex charges, get him thrown in jail, and then steal every worldly possession he had. Thomas White 2.0. They figured a lonely old man with no family and only a handful of close friends would disappear with little fanfare. They were wrong. From this point forward, there are a lot of moving parts. So to get your bearings on who is where, here's what we know. In early December, Kaushal was in Palm Springs. Danny and David Replogle were in Modesto and San Francisco, respectively. So even though none of the three in cahoots to kidnap Cliff were in the same city, they were texting every step of the way. The following texts are from December 2nd, 2008. Kaushal.
We can't do it today. Text me his number and we're canceling until tomorrow.
Danny.
This is a mess. Fuck it. The whole thing is off. Why do you need a map of the house?
Kaushal.
Dude, I need it for me. You're supposed to give me the layouts and you never gave me anything. Call David right now.
The next day, December 3rd. Danny.
What color is his piano?
Kaushal.
Look, if you want to play mind games, go ahead.
Danny.
I know you never went into the house. Don't bullshit me. I know you're lying. I'll let David know you're wasting his time.
That brings us to December 4th. This is the evening Cliff is scheduled to have dinner with Samuel Oren / Kaushal Narula to discuss what he inherited from the dead heiress. At 7:30 p.m., Cliff arrived at the restaurant. As you heard earlier, Cliff was skeptical of Oren's story, but he really was friends with the heiress, and she had died, so there were some facts to hang his hat on. That said, you may remember that Cliff had asked Carl to spy on their meeting.
Cliff said, look at us from afar and just look at us and just check it out. And so we did.
Carl and his business partner were down for the mission. They had front row seats to the action.
So Cliff came in and we sat at the bar and we just looked at this cute guy from Nepal. And then after dinner, Cliff introduced us to us, and he just said all these things. He just flew in from his private jet, and he was here to do some work. And I mean, the kid was, his eyes were really he was a cute kid.
Yeah. From Carl's brief interaction with Oren/Kaushal, nothing seemed off. And then Cliff and Kaushal left and went their separate ways. The next and last time Carl heard from Cliff was on a voicemail.
And then he called. There was a message on the phone. He just said, I need to talk to both of you. And then he never called back.
Meanwhile, after his dinner with Cliff, Kaushal traded a few more texts with Danny. Kaushal.
Answer the phone. We have progress.
Danny.
I'm going to bed. This thing is a bust. You can tell David the bad news.
It appears David Replogle received the bad news, or any news for that matter, via phone calls instead of texts. Between December 2nd and December 5th, David called Kaushal 77 times and Danny 60 times. On December 6th, 2 days after Cliff dined with Oren/Kaushal, there was a Palm Springs annual holiday parade called the Festival of Lights that Cliff, a humongous fan of Christmas, would never in a million years miss. Only he did. To get some insight on the holiday event, I called Palm Springs news anchor and investigative reporter Karen Devine.
It's usually the first Saturday of the month in December, and the who's who come out, and either they're part of the parade, local leaders, you know what I mean, in the parade, waving. But the streets are full, the shops are full, the restaurants, the bars, everything is packed like in layers.
Cliff made plans to meet two of his friends to watch the parade. If you didn't make a plan to meet your friends at the corner of, 6th and Main, would you ever find your friends, or is it that packed?
It's that packed.
So with everything I know so far about Cliff and his disappearance, he was supposed to meet his friends for the parade.
All right.
So they knew when he didn't show up to that something was wrong.
All right.
According to court documents, here's what happened next. After the parade ended, Cliff's friends, Cody and Eddie, decided to check on him. You already know what they found, a drink and some cigarettes that made them think maybe Cliff decided to have some fun of a more private nature. At 10:17 the next morning, it's now December 7th, a neighbor saw the gate to Cliff's driveway open. Odd for him. So the neighbor peered in the driveway and discovered the front door to his house ajar. This was completely abnormal, so the neighbor called police. Officers checked out the house but discovered nothing out of place, so they secured the property and left. 1 hour and 45 minutes later, at 11:59 a.m., Eddie, who still hadn't heard from Cliff, sat worriedly at the Palm Springs Police Department. It was time to report Cliff missing. Here's news anchor Karen Devine with more. How common is it for people to go missing in the Palm Springs area?
People go missing. We hear about it all the time. Elderly people with dementia, a runaway, that sort of thing. But in talking to the captain of the Palm Springs Police Department, he said it is rare for someone to go missing and for there to be foul play.
For that reason, and because Cliff was an adult who had the free will to go wherever he wanted, foul play was not on anyone's radar. But Cliff's whereabouts were still puzzling to the authorities and his friends. Palm Springs PD called the local hospitals, checked Cliff's DMV records, and learned he owned 2 vehicles, a Rolls-Royce and a Mercedes. When police secured his home, they took note of the Rolls-Royce in the garage, but the Mercedes was MIA. They ran a check to see if the car had been spotted anywhere. It hadn't.
I can't even imagine, my friends wondering if they hadn't heard from me. First of all, how long would it take before they were like, why is Julie not responding? And, have you ever thought, how long before people would realize there's a problem?
Totally.
Yeah, it's interesting with Cliff, right? Because there is no, easy to identify boundary of when something must be going wrong.
Right. I know. And this one was super circumstantial because he had plans, to meet his friends at the Palm Springs holiday parade. Cliff was over the moon about Christmas. He had Christmas parties. He loved Christmas. So when he didn't show up to that holiday parade, right away they were like, this is weird. He wouldn't just miss this and he wouldn't not call because we had plans.
And obviously at that point as a friend, I would, of course, I'm neurotic and Jewish. I would assume that they were trapped under a large piece of furniture or in a ditch on the side of the road. I would never in a million years think there was some nefarious criminal element around this person.
For sure. That's also why 3 hours later, his friends were like, knock, knock, where are you? Because they were worried. No sign of him. He's not under furniture. He didn't slip and fall in the bathtub. He's not drowned in his pool. You know, he's not there. And not only is he not there, one of his cars is gone. And then as the hours kept ticking on and days are passing, they were like, okay, 911, going to the police. I think they felt in their gut. He didn't just run off to Guam.
I guess that's what's interesting to me. Would we know in our gut that something was off?
Right.
You know?
In the weeks after his disappearance, a handful of Cliff's friends were listening to their guts. And their guts were telling them something was wrong. They called, texted, and sent Cliff concerned emails. Then they heard back. Cliff's emails explained he was undergoing a series of invasive dental procedures in Los Angeles, and thereafter planned to do some traveling. Although it was out of character that he didn't share this information before leaving town, the explanation of his whereabouts was a welcome relief to his worried friends. But meanwhile, 450 miles away, in the quaint Silicon Valley adjacent town of Saratoga, California, a total stranger was beginning to worry. His name is Mark Evans, and he just received a call from an old friend he hadn't seen in months. Mark works in real estate, and the friend was asking for his help to sell a house. The house was in Palm Springs, and the friend was Kaushal Narula.
Hello?
Hi, is this Mark?
Yes,
Hey, Mark. My name is Kim Kantner.
I remember you left me a message. You still chasing the Dark Prince, huh?
In case you missed that, he said, "Still chasing the Dark Prince, huh?" I was indeed. That's next time on American Hustlers. American Hustlers is a production of Frequency Machine, produced in association with True Crime News. This episode was written and hosted by me, Kim Kantner, and produced by me, Julie Golden, and Avi Glajansky. Editing and sound design by Amy Durant. Mixing and mastering by Julian Kwasniewski. Executive produced by Stacy Book, Dominique Ferrari, and Avi Glajansky. Featuring the voices of Vivek Bola as Kaushal Narula, William Updike as Danny Garcia, and David Song as Miguel Bustamante. Music courtesy of Jingle Punks. Archival recordings of Kaushal Narula and Danny Garcia provided by Sherry Loiter, Don Martinez, and Kim Hansen. Archival recordings of Craig McCarthy and the Palm Springs Police and Danny Garcia's recordings of Judge Downing and the court clerk via desertsun.com. The book, Until Someone Gets Hurt, by Sherry Loiter and Tyson Wrench, with research assistance by Don Martinez and Kim Hansen, was an invaluable resource for us as we made American Hustlers. You can find a link to it in our show notes. Special thanks to Kathy Lombard, Matt Smith, Andy Wells, Tyson Wrench, Sherry Loiter, Don Martinez, Kim Hansen, Bob Moeller, and Christine Anotu at Warner Brothers. If you like this episode and want to hear more stories like this, please leave us a review and tell everyone. It really helps other people discover the show. For more information on this and all of our series, check out frequencymachine.com.